Hello everyone and welcome to the All About Film for Fuji Superia 400 Extra. This video discusses Fuji Superia 400 Extra film and looks at how to use it, the film's characteristics, technical details, and sample images. Of note, this video does not look at Fuji Superia Premium. That's a different stock. In the US, we call this stock Extra. For brevity, we'll refer to Extra simply as Superia 400 in this video. Superia 400 is a fast film. It's available in 35mm factory cassettes of 36 frames, or I should say was available. As of this video's recording, I don't know if they're continuing forward with the Extra name or changing to a different branding. My recommended rating for this film is going to be 400 ISO. You can overexpose it a hair, but we'll talk about that in the technical section. I don't really recommend it. The best tip I'm going to be able to give you for getting the most out of this film is just to shoot it at box speed as a general walk-around film that you can use for all kinds of different subjects. This does work very well. There's no subjects with this film that work better or worse than anything else, though as a consumer-grade film, this is not going to be the sort of film that you would want to use for a high-end shoot or a professional shoot where you're using film. Grain is on par with the expectations of a consumer-grade 400 ISO film. Compared to the other consumer-grade 400 ISO film on the market, UltraMax, I would rank the photos I took early in this video's photo taking as having a more pleasant grain, and those taken later in the process as being on par with UltraMax. Something at some point seemed to change. Looking back at my very old photos from the 90s and early 2000s that I took with Fuji Superia 400 Extra back then, it was my go-to film for many years, show a substantially different image character. Tonality and tonal range are, as expected, for consumer-grade film stocks. They're not great, but they'll get the job done. Acutance is a bit soft, even by consumer-grade film standards. With some subjects, like portraits, this can be quite nice. But for some subjects, you're going to be a little bit let down by the lack of sharpness and transition between sharp and soft areas, or light and dark areas. Contrast is strong, and it is hard to have a bit of highlight and shadow detail in the same image. In general, you will get one or the other. Dynamic range is fine by consumer film standards. There are many color films on the market that are higher end and perform better, but compared to other films in Superia's class, this performs as expected. Digital conversion is better than some other film stocks, and I think this owes to the emphasis that Fuji places on green in their emulsions. Sharpness is pretty decent all around. Fuji's specs page for Superia 400 indicates a line pairs per millimeter rating of 125 LPmm. That's not half bad for a 400 ISO consumer-grade C41 film. Consider that Fuji Velvia 50 was, if I recall correctly, in the 160 LPmm range, and the original Acros 100 was 200 LPmm, and, well, 125 really isn't that shabby for this class of film. So really quickly, to help explain what the LPmm rating means, if the film was used to photograph alternating black and white stripes, then the film could record 125 of each pair per millimeter. That's 250 total lines per millimeter. And it could have them be in suitable resolution at that recording level. There is, of course, some flex in what suitable resolution means, but I digress from the point. If we count each line as a pixel, that means 250 pixels per millimeter, which is 6,000 by 9,000 pixels if you want to convert that to digital resolution. That means that Fuji Superia 400 can resolve on par with a 54 megapixel full-frame sensor according to Fuji's published data. Do I believe that to be true? The spectral sensitivity curve is used to describe the film's relative sensitivity on the y-axis to visible light colors on the x-axis. I'm going to do something a little different with the spectral sensitivity section in this video. A number of people on this channel and around the internet have been repeating the claim by a certain other photography person in another country from me that Fuji stopped making film and Kodak makes Fuji films now. Specifically, I hear a lot that Fuji Superia is just renamed Kodak UltraMax 400. This seems plausible as the current Superia Extra datasheet shows a spectral sensitivity curve that lacks the fourth green-forming layer that Fuji Superia films used to include. And, to my eye, Superia does, quite frankly, look a lot like UltraMax in the last couple of years. I have no specific information to indicate if that's true, though, about Fuji and Kodak. But I do have the current datasheets for both stocks, and both datasheets show the spectral sensitivity curves. So let's compare both spectral sensitivity curves and the dye density curves for both films as well. Wow, that's a lot of similarity, but it's not perfectly identical. And that's all I have to say about that, except that it's not. See, I have used more Fuji Superia 400 than any other film in my life, period, and end of story. And that's because it was my go-to 35mm film for more than a decade. And I remember picking it because it had this fourth green line on the datasheet spectral sensitivity, a cyan line that came from a special cyan and green sensitive interlayer in the emulsion. And I thought that meant it was better because I was still young. And the old Fuji, well, those greens really did pop. It took some doing, but I found an old Fuji datasheet online. Here's how that datasheet spectral sensitivity and dye density curve data align with the current Fuji and UltraMax data. Now, these new data that I'm adding here, these come from the 2003 Fuji technical publication that provided the tech specs on all their film stocks at the time. Check the T-Max 100 link in the video's description for the source if you'd like to read more. The new packaging for Fuji 400 indicates a film stock made in the US. None of that film was used in this video, by the way. And as of this video's recording, I don't have any of that film in my hands. But here's what I suspect to be the case with Fuji 400, and I believe there is precedent for this theory based on Acros 2. So Acros 2 is made in the UK. We can assume by Harman at either the Ilford or Kentmere factories, unless there's some sleeper UK film producer of which I'm unaware. I understand that Acros 2 is made to Fuji's spec to perform in a manner much like the original Acros. If it does so or not, we'll discuss that in the Acros 2 video when it arrives on 30 October 2023. Anyway, assuming everything I just said to be the case, the existence of Acros 2 creates a precedent that Fuji could license their film emulsion formulae to another firm to produce film for them. I know of only one US-based filmmaker producing C41 films, so it seems a solid probability that Fuji's new film stocks are in fact produced by Kodak. Are they just rebadged Kodak films? I don't see enough similarity in the data sheets between the stocks to say conclusively that I believe that to be the case. To my eye, the modern Fuji Superia 400 looks like it's probably produced in the same manner as the old stock, but without the fourth cyan-green-sensitive interlayer. Now, just to clarify, I have no specific intel on that either way. It's just a theory. The datasheet provides limited reciprocity failure data for Superia 400. For shutter speeds of 1/4000th of a second to as slow as 2 seconds, no exposure compensation will be necessary. For shutter speeds from 4 to 16 seconds, you'll need to add 1/3 of a stop. For shutter speeds of 16 to 64 seconds, you'll need to add 2/3 of a stop. And for shutter speeds longer than 64 seconds, you'll need to add a full stop. No information was provided about using color correction filters to address color shifts during long exposures. In general, most of your shutter speeds with this film will not require any long exposure compensation whatsoever unless you're doing something like astrophotography or you have really stacked a ton of ND filters in front of your lens. The datasheet indicates that Superia 400 can deliver images even with insufficient lighting. The datasheet and I have wildly different opinions about that. I would hesitate to underexpose Superia 400 by more than a half stop. Superia 400 will always have a special place in my heart, even if the exact stock that I knew and used and honestly liked quite a bit when I was younger is now gone. And I believe it is. This video, made over the span of about 7 years, shows a Superia that performed much like I remember the stock performing, at least until the last couple of years. If it is true that Kodak produces Fujifilm now, my sincere hope is that it's produced to replicate Superia and to be something different than the Kodak offerings are. Rebadging another stock is a disservice to the film community. However, having Kodak produce Superia as something different than UltraMax would be a service to the film community, and that should be supported. Right now, and maybe for the rest of time into the future, I can't tell you what Fujifilms will be. All I can tell you is that, for a long time, we had Fuji Superia 400 Extra. It had a cyan-green-sensitive interlayer. It was something different from UltraMax, and film photography needs those different products.